This week on RSBANDB Update, the beach is back for another year, and into the hole we go. We also take a peek at the Zamorak Undercity rewards. Finally, Mod2 joins us for another installment of Behind the Crown, where we learn why he plays RuneScape and what brought him to Jagex. This is RSBANDB Update, episode 889, recorded Thursday, June 30th, 2022. Once more unto the hole. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of RSBANDB Update. This week, it's just Tanis and myself here for now. Welcome back, Tanis.
Thank you, Shane.
Good to be back. Good to be back. The beach is back. We got more news on the next Elite Dungeon and the Legacy of Zamorak quarter, or I guess 6 months coming up in terms of RS updates. Also, this week, we're back with our second installment of Behind the Crown, and Mod2 will be joining us later on in the episode to talk about his journey at Jagex, what got him into game development, and how he plays RuneScape. Yes, he is a JMod who actually plays RuneScape and has multiple accounts, believe it or not, so we go into a bit about his backstory with the game, how he got to Jagex, and what he does when he plays RuneScape. So that's going to be a wonderful conversation that'll be coming up in a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about the beach and Legacy of Zamorak and the upcoming Elite Dungeon. If you want full show notes, you can find those at update.show. I am Shane12088 in-game. You can find Tanis at Tanis79, and if you want to join us, our friends chat is BitsBytes. We also have Discord at rsbnb.com/Discord, but more on that later. So how you feeling this week? You good for the beach?
You know, it's funny you ask. A little under the weather today, but I am so excited to for the Behind the Crown portion. But as for the beach, it was fun to see everybody.
To clamber into the hole?
You gotta get in that hole, man. You gotta get in there. Yeah, so that's definitely been a good time. But it's just been a good time to see people down there again.
Yeah.
That was always the thing about the beach was, you had your training, you have this or that, but it's just the shenanigans people
it's the social element behind it.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And a lot of people I haven't seen or talked to, in a long time, because it's a little harder for me to do that. But when we're all there, it's a lot of fun, and it's still, for me, it still hits the right beats. It's still, I'm still enjoying it, and you can't beat the hole.
Yeah. Yep. I got to get there on the alt. Just haven't had the time to do that yet this week. Been busy with other things that you guys might see next week, barring them actually working the way I want them to. A little bit of experimentation going on, but activities we got this year: we got sandcastle building, barbecues, the rock pool fishing, palm tree farming, hook a duck, coconut shy, bodybuilding, and of course the dungeoneering hole. Last time at the beach, I went from 115 to 117 at the hole.
And you put a lot of time in that hole, Shane.
I definitely did. And I just had to actually check something with the hole, and I was wondering about this. Yeah, you are. For mobile, I was thinking dungeoneering hole plus mobile. Are you still actually able to chat with that? And it looks like you are still indeed able to access your friends chat, your clan chat, and your friends list. Because I was thinking there was some part of the game that wasn't accessible when you were in the hole, but it just looks to be your abilities and your inventory, which is fine. But you're 100% able to access the chat, which is good. And I mean, hey, let's be honest here. You're going to be watching a TV show at any point in this month. Go do something at the beach on mobile. And combine the two.
Oh, for sure. I mean, because we're all such fans of dungeoneering, I love this edition was so OP when it came out. And it's still,
and it was controversial too, thinking about it.
It was, but now, I think it's just taken as, well, yeah, nobody really wants to
Right.
that much.
I mean, but there are the Dungeoneering fans out there. We need to be 100%
Well,
honest with that.
yeah, but it's a yes. The people, the way I put it is, the people that like it really like it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's always been fun when it comes to, if you can get your friends together and do it. Not so bad then, but that's harder and harder to do these days. And
Yeah,
so,
and I feel
like,
with that, best time for Dungeoneering, if you're in that boat, is the double XP periods. So
double XP periods are good, and the whole
yeah,
pull you up, like you said, Shane.
yeah,
Pull up mobile, and you can watch a movie, watch something, and just go to town.
yeah. And just for reference here, of course, bodybuilding is for strength. The coconut shy throwing arena is for ranged, of course. Barbecues, cooking, palm tree farming, of course. Rock pools for fishing. XP, sandcastle building, construction. Maybe I'll be doing that with the alt, thinking about it. Construction. Hook-a-duck is hunter. We know what the dungeoneering hole is for. Then, of course, we got the other side activities, including the Sandy Clue Scroll and Claudia, whenever Claudia appears. So, overall, not too much I don't think, to report on in terms of new beach activities that weren't there previously. The only thing that they removed this year was the heat wave mechanic, which I think makes sense because this summer, I don't know about you, but definitely this summer here has been cooler than last summer. So I'm
yeah, I mean, it's definitely been up and down for us, but no, I like this, and here's the other thing about the beach. If you do have alts, if you're looking for a second, maxing a second account, or just getting a second or third or fourth account up to snuff with whatever skills you need, this is a great place to do it. It's real low key. It's, real laid back, and I've spent a lot of time at these different events, building an alt up to be able to get it to do what I need it to do. So
yeah, fair.
Once again, another nice selection on offer here.
Claudia is also a safe death this year. That's new.
Yeah,
I think there might have been,
okay.
There might have been some discussion on what that meant for hardcore Iron Man, I think. So
oh yeah,
that's 100% right, because why should somebody who is a hardcore Iron Man have to worry about ruining their account with the community event, right? So
yeah.
So there's that. Let's go through some of the new rewards then for this year. We got the Aya Beachwear, which is wonderful. We got 3 new surfboards, including an Elder God themed surfboard, which kind of looks like fragments of Stone of Jazz on it. The ore weapon override. I could only imagine you wanting to beat someone over the head with an ore. Flower hairpins as well, which, in all honesty, looks more Hawaiian than Ian, I guess, but I guess that's the inspiration on that. So that's neat. And I think the Aya Beachwear actually looks pretty good too, in terms of what's available. And you know what the best part about this is, actually? Is that there's portions of it that are actually recolorable.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. And you know what we're noticing here with this? I don't know if anybody's noticed this for the concept artwork, but the concept artwork images are using the new player models from the Avatar refresh.
I did not notice that. Huh. Well, don't read too much into that.
No, yeah, we of course need to hear more about that when that project comes back online. But I think I'll go for the cosmetics this year, and they're cheap enough that you spend like an hour a day there, or not even that. by the end of the month, you're gonna get all these eventually. So it's nothing really to fret over. So
yeah, easily.
I'm not too much for the surfboards, but I think I definitely got to get that ore override.
Yeah, I like the ore.
Yeah, I'm just imagining myself walking somewhere and then hitting someone over the head with the ore. Oh, it's so wonderful. But yeah, that's the beach. I don't know that there's anything else we necessarily need to say about it, except it's nice to have these social events coming around, and this one just feels so much more engaging than what we have for Easter, for example, right?
Yeah, and I mean, part of that is it's crazy to say that there's a nostalgia for the beach, but there kind of was.
Yeah.
Because and the reason why I think is because it just somehow, I don't know if it was the time or how it came out, but it really became a very, very social. It was just a very social event, more so than the others, in that way.
Right.
And so
like
it just has a special place for us.
We didn't have a beach in 19, but we did through 15 through 18, and we know what was happening in 15 through 18. Those were those years when we were specifically 17, when we were questioning what the future of RS was going to be, and it was just so good to have the community events around at that time. And it was a push by the community, I think, that brought them back. Because if you think about it, if I think back to the spring of 2020, when archaeology was coming out and what people were trying to figure out how to, of course, do with themselves in that summer of the pandemic, I remember there was a live stream with the leads at the time who said that they definitely need to do something for this and just look at bringing the beach back, even if it was just as it was. So.
Yeah, and I'm glad they finally learned that. You know what I mean? Like, it's great to get a new coat of paint. It's great to add to, but if something works and people really, really like it, you can bring it back. Like, the beach is an example. If they brought back, Dev's house, they could do nothing different than what they did before, and people would still love it.
I actually think the Halloween event we have right now is actually pretty good.
Well, it is. See, and it's the opposite, right? Like, that is one that has to be added to, each time around, because it kind of freshens it up a little bit. But
yeah, and then
I guess that would be the counter to my
right. And then you're left with the question: you have the summer beach. Do you need something like that in the winter? Because in the winter, we have the presents from the sledge, of course, daily, and the wrapping paper that you get, in addition to any rares that come with that. Last year, we had Secret Santa, and, with those two things and a Christmas yak track, I think you pretty much got the Christmas event handled with that. But at the same time, do players want a social event for Christmas where they can all gather together? I think that's the next question that comes from that.
Well, and the one Christmas event that stands out to me, the one that I enjoyed the most.
The one was at the crater?
Yes. With, it had the meals and the reindeer and the snowball fights, and it was really fun, and there was always something to do. I definitely lean towards that direction when it comes to a Christmas event.
Right. I don't know. It's hard for me to say, because you're right. The beach definitely just does put yourself into that spot. But at the same time, there's been so many other great memories of past holiday events that they all stick out in some way or another. It'd be interesting to hear what the listeners have to say on that. But with that, I think we want to move on now to what the listeners have, or the community has been talking about since last Saturday when we were flying off to Seattle for our roundtable. The Legacy of Zamorak chapter that starts on Monday, the 4th of July, interestingly enough, begins with the Zamorakian Undercity Elite Dungeon. How are you feeling about this? I know we got a bit of a preview of it last week. How are you feeling about it going in? Now that we know that there's actually going to be a story mode that's going to have a chance at giving you loot.
I'm definitely a fan of that. I don't know what they're trying to say about the 4th of July releasing the God of Chaos onto the world on that day. We'll try not to
Do you read too much into it?
yeah, we'll try not to read too much into that. No, I'm hoping that out of all of the Elite Dungeons, this one might fit me the best. That being said, with the changes that have been made, obviously I wouldn't be able to, farm anything or anything like that.
You don't know that.
But they put the rewards close. Those are closer to the ends, right? Like,
yeah,
they just did that with the other one, so I wouldn't think that this would be any different. It wouldn't make sense if they had didn't do that with this. But the mere fact of being able to run through it, I think that'll be fun. The Zamorak fight itself, not looking forward to that, and probably won't do very well. Although I will say I've made some major investments into improving.
Oh yeah, right. You were saying at the round table. You were saying at the round table you bought Crypt Bloom.
Yeah.
You'll be able to do story mode with Crypt Bloom. You'll probably even be able to do the regular boss with Crypt Bloom at that.
Yeah, maybe. So, that's why. That's why we did that.
And fun fact here, folks. We've just recorded our most recent monthly bit, and this one was the PVM boss tier with David Thaxi and Earth. And David was continually questioning through it, should I be rating this before Crypt Bloom or after Crypt Bloom? Because Crypt Bloom just makes so many mechanics irrelevant for things like God Wars 2 caliber bosses and such.
That's what I'm looking for, right? That's what I'm looking for.
Crypt Bloom plus Animated Dead, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So just as a recap on this, 1 to 5 players, reward will scale based on the number of people you bring in. Story mode is there. 90% reduced damage with a small chance of actually farming loot from the main drop tables on this, interestingly enough. Then the Enrage mode that we talked about with the yardstick measuring contest with increasing amounts of damage that Zamorak will deal out on that. And we're going to try and avoid speculating too much this week into the mechanics and the meta changes that are going to be coming with this. We want to see what the actual stats are without going through screenshots of live streams on this, because there were a lot of those, and we have a general idea of what they're going to do, but we just want to wait and see all this stuff drops out until it's actually in game. One of the interesting mechanics of Zamorak is apparently going to be hexes versus runes. So if you activate a certain rune from the Edict's ritual, that will activate a certain effect on the boss. So it'll be up to you and your team to decide what to activate when you're inside the fight. So that'll be an interesting angle to it as well. And they also said it's a more condensed Elite Dungeon in that there's only the one boss at the end. And there's many bosses through the way as well. Yeah, so it's condensed. It's
okay. I didn't realize that. It's just Zamorak.
So once again, we're kind of distorting the definition of what a raid is in other games, because in most other games, raids have multiple bosses, but now we're back to the raid format, but with only one boss at the end of it. I don't know if things like World of Warcraft have raids with only one boss in it or not. I don't play that game, so
yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think we can get it done next week. I think we'll get it done. And then I also have to talk about Freedom Mode, which you pointed out last week was the bug-made feature. After 25 kills, you can just skip straight to the boss.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Was that a bug? No, actually, we plan that all the time.
It's a feature.
It's a feature.
There'll, of course, be a mini quest with it as well. But let's get into the rewards. We already talked about the yardstick measuring contest of permanent score, high scores and such. But we know what the slivers will upgrade. We got that information on Saturday. The upgradable items will be the Hex Hunter Bow, the Inquisitor Staff, and the Pterosaur Maul, as well as enhanced Carapac wrist wraps, gloves of passage, and nightmare gauntlets, and the rings that came from the Rex Matriarchs, which is these three are perhaps going to be the most interesting, because this will have the side effect of keeping the value that you get from the slivers inside this elite dungeon good and strong. It will also have the side effect of keeping the drops that you get from the Rex Matriarch strong, and it will have the tertiary effect of keeping the drops, the rings, the core rings that came out all those years ago from the Dagonoth Kings strong.
Mm-hmm. And it seems to me like I can't remember if it was on a bit or a show. Listen to David. It sounded to me like those rings from the Rex Matriarchs, they're best in slot, aren't they?
Yeah, except for one of the rings is not. I think it's the ranged ring because not many people use bows, but the Channeler's ring and Stalker's ring, I think, is the one that people are always jumping up and down about, come to think of it. No, not the Stalker's ring. That's the one with the bow. So it's got to be the Champion's ring then. Champions and Channelers, of course.
Okay.
So, fun fact: the blue Rex Matriarch Fen Tracken is the best one to kill there if you're getting a Rex Matriarch's Reaper task. So, because of that.
Okay.
Just an FYI. Just a
little tip. Tip, little something on the side.
Yeah, let's see what the current price is at. Channeler's ring, 213 mil.
Oh no! Really?
With 15 mil from the Sears ring from the original Dagonoth Kings. So based on how quick you can kill Dagonoth Kings.
Wow. And the Matriarchs are good. I mean, that's a good, I wouldn't say entry level, but
modern entry level.
Modern entry level, yeah. Yeah. It's a boss that even I can do.
Yeah,
so.
and bit of a spoiler, a bit of a preview of that monthly bit that we just recorded. We rated the Rex Matriarchs pretty high just because of that reason.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah. Also, lore drops as well. And what everybody's been waiting for, the tier 95 bow. The bow of the Last Guardian. Drops in 3 pieces. The pieces drop in order. It has a passive and a special attack on it. Its passive ability gains a stack each time you hit your target, and at 8 stacks, it'll deal damage to the target based on your last used ability.
Oh, that sounds like
so the interesting part, and I don't know if
EOF
EOF or special attack works in this, because it would be absolutely insane thinking about this going off with a dark bow or Saren God bow spec. So I'm thinking it says ability, so we're kind of in the category of things like snipe and dead shot and such. But just when you factor in the amount of damage that those do,
yeah,
and you can have that go off based on the bow that you're using. So if you time your rotation right, this passive has the potential to be pretty darn good. And its special attack will also deal, they say, a hefty chunk of damage. We'll wait for actual numbers on that. And it will reduce the stacks required to launch the passive from 8 to 4.
Oh, okay.
And you know what the fun part about this is? Is that for the longest time, crossbows and bolts has been the ranged meta.
Yeah, now,
and the interesting part for high-end ranged will be to see how many people take this bow up.
I was just
where it factors in
with
the Eldritch crossbow or the Blights, the tier 92 Blight main hand offhand crossbows, because what you're giving up with this, of course, is you're giving up the Hydrix bolts as an adrenaline gainer. if you're using crossbow and bolts. So you're going to need to factor in something else to that, whether that's something like your Death Spore arrows that are going to make the ultimate abilities cost less, and so on and so forth with that. So there's going to be lots of questions about how that all stacks in and what arrows you're going to do with this. We were already having a bit of a discussion in post-show of our monthly bit last night about how prohibitively expensive the Dyne arrows are to use for an Iron Man, and the fact that in an hour you're going to burn through thousands of these arrows, but you can't even make them that fast as an Iron Man. And those are the only tier 95 arrows in game. And the reason why I'm talking about this and where it's going to sit, and if people are going to move off of things like the tier 92 crossbows, is because this bow does not provide its own ammunition like the Saren God bow does. So that's going to be one of the big questions.
Well, the bigger question should not ever been a thing in the first place.
Yeah, charge bows, right?
Yeah, I mean, but since it is, it is. Now, my question has always been, I have kind of the same concerns. Of course, we'll let the number crunchers and the elites, the elite PVMers will figure out what the metas are to all of this. But if they are comparable, would people move? I wonder, like, are they so entrenched in just the traditional way of thinking that they wouldn't move to this bow?
It's going to come down to adrenaline management, and if people can be convinced to give up the adrenaline of Hydrix.
Yeah, that's
because the reason why it's so comfortable to use magic is that you can gain magic adrenaline easy off of things like Tsunami and such when you crit, and crit builds are so inherent to magic. Whereas with ranged, that same adrenaline gain is built into Hydrix, and within melee, it's been built into things like the drops from the abyssal creatures that we saw in February, and some other new things which we can go on to right now. So we'll have more on all this next week, of course.
Yeah.
They are introducing a set, and I'm not going to call it armor. They're introducing a set of tier 95 melee robes that is effectively the glass cannon set. Because these robes have tier 100 damage bonus, but only tier 70 armor.
Yeah, that's weird, but I mean, and the thing with that is, like, the people that are really good, they don't get hit very much,
Right, and for certain bosses, if you're able to flick to Soul Split, these high hits are going to heal you up.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting part about this and what it does for melee is that when you use an ultimate ability, it regenerates 15% adrenaline over 18 seconds if you're using 2 to 5 pieces of the set. It can also extend the duration of Berserk by 6 seconds if you're using the 3-piece, and increases your maximum adrenaline by 20% if you're using all 4 pieces.
Interesting. So, I mean, this
it's basically just like unloading all the damage into melee with this.
It reminds me of what was the sets you used to get from Pest Control?
Void.
Void. This is the new Void.
But the thing with Void is that was hybrid. This is power for melee, so it's way better than that ever was.
Well, I mean, yeah, but it's the same kind of concept. I think this is neat, and it could give us, like, if melee actually was a tanking class, which somehow it isn't, because of magic.
We're light years away from that now. We just we just hit Warp 9, headed off to who knows where from that. We're not going anywhere near that now.
but I picture, like the lightly well, not even armored, just the pirate with this frilly shirt with 2 sabers in his hand, just going ham. I mean, that's kind of what this reminds me of.
I would absolutely love to get into melee for this, seeing this now. The only question is, of course, where do you use it? Of course, we know it's good at places like hard mode Karapak. And the thing is, though, that so many other bosses are better fought at distance because of their mechanics. So that's either magic or range. So we'll have to wait and see about where this one drops. But it's definitely catapulted Melee into that glass cannon-y territory with that, which I think just adds even more distinction onto it, which is hilarious.
Well, and it will depend on the cost and, things like that, because, I mean, could you imagine you would rip through Slayer Task with that stuff? Just rip through them.
Speaking of, there's a new ability called Chaos Roar that doubles the damage of your next hit. Imagine combining that with Tuska's Wrath.
Yeah.
They also mentioned it'll work with special attacks like the Zuck Sword.
Okay.
So that's that.
Yeah.
The dungeon will also drop blank codex upgrades that can be converted into greater sunshine or greater death swiftness, which eliminate the need for planted feet as a switch, extending their duration and allowing them to keep their AoE damage despite being small.
So there's the there's the reduction in switchscape.
Yeah.
But that's good. Like, I think this makes sense to me, and I'm kind of glad that they're blank too. That you can
convert
make it
it
either
to whichever
or.
one you want. Yeah. I will just say that a couple weeks ago I built my second planted feet perk, and I was contemplating for the next bit of PVM if it was time to buy more Syra components, but I guess it's not. Syra components from the Hellware weapons are what you use to make planted feet. But you know what the good part is that planted feet is not obsolete. So if you wanted to use your switch, you could still do that. I don't know why you would, but hey, there you go.
Could be a cost thing. Yeah. Who knows what this will be when it actually hits.
Right, exactly. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with Hellware on this, because those weapons that you get from there for the planted feet perks are the only reason to kill Hellware at this point, unless you want to dabble in defensives. So. But
it's true. And I'm going to be spending a lot of time with Hellware at some point.
What? Why?
Well, yeah. Because I have Crypt Bloom, baby.
I think there's better things to kill with Crypt Bloom than Hellware. Like Greg or the Furies, I'd say. Actually, not the Furies, never mind.
Yeah, I've never really liked Greg very much.
Okay. Yeah. Zamo the Rak is the pet. So there's that. And with that, I think we can go on into what's happening after the Legacy of Zamorak Elite Dungeon, because we learned a bit about what's there, of course, as well. What we're going to be getting in August, leading into September. But before we do that, I'm going to thank our Patreon supporters for this week. The last time we do this in June, as we are recording on the 30th of June right now. So this week I'd like to thank Andrew C., Arvids L., Big Huge Rat, Bryflex, CGB900, Christian S., Chunk the Monk, Dominic F., Drama Free, Duramax, Elomady, Plazaman, Free Milk, Jade Gizmo, Jason S., Jeebus, Jesse W., Ling01, Lucky Ducky, Mohan V., Nate the Great, Nick G., OTR Gamer, Patty the Architect, Pernasius, Renhawk, Ricky A., Samuel FL, Skiotan, Scott DS, Seth W., Stabeve, Tabby, The Naked Captain, Tom V., Zant, and Zazakon. Thank you, everybody, for supporting us. It means the world to us, allowing us to do this each and every week. If you want to learn more about what these guys have all signed up for, just check us out at patreon.com/RSBANDB. They're starting at as little as $1 a month. You gain access to the entire back catalog of monthly bits, including the most recent one on the PVM boss tier list. It was a really fun episode because we had people on from the entire spectrum, from novice, who was Earth, to mid-range, me, high-end, Thaxi, and then Ultra High End David, and we went through each boss in game, and we rated them on a series of criteria that we put together, not just on, you know, the easiest, the hardest, or which one's going to be the most profitable, which one. We went into the whole thing about how they're designed and how they've aged and whatnot, and which bosses are actually good. So if it sounds like you want to hear that, just sign up for as little as $1 a month, and you gain access to that and all the other monthly bits at patreon.com/RSBANDB. You can also go for the VIP tier, which is $3 a month. That includes Discord chat channel access, and I mentioned on the podcast at the start of the month, plus high-quality stereo versions of the show. And, of course, we do have the Insider tier, where should you want to make the ultimate gift, we provide you with the clips and outtakes that we use to make the clip show at the end of the year, in addition to everything else. And we are, of course, marching towards that Hot Ones challenge. We're halfway there at this point, so if you or a friend know anybody who might be interested in some extra content for the podcast, just check it out at patreon.com/RSBNB, and it's a wonderful thing that you guys have allowed us to do this, and we get so much support from you guys. So thanks so much for enabling us to do this. It's quite fun each and every week. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you all for being the best enablers in the world
of RuneScape podcasting. All right. So that's July. Independence Day. New Elite Dungeon. Free Death Week. But a month later in August, we get the Daughter of Chaos quest, which follows up from the Aftermath mini quest. It goes through the Zamorakian Civil War and them attacking Saradomus, fighting over for control of the wilderness, and it also brings the rebirth of the wilderness, as they're calling it. Or the Wilderness Reborn, rather. They're doing an entire graphical rework with the wilderness, Tanis, with optional PvP, where the longer you stay in the wilderness, you'll have a higher threat level. They didn't reveal too much about how PvP will be made optional, but I think this is what everybody has been asking for, was a hybrid combination of a PVM-like event like we had in World War II. I mean, World War II.
That was a combat event for sure.
World Event 2. Set around various checkpoints and whatnot. And what I am so interested to see on this, and of course we've seen little bits and previews of what the graphical rework of the wilderness looks like with this, but what I'm really interested to see is just how they do this optional PvP aspect of it. That's what I want to know. How we're going to do that. And how they're actually going to make the wilderness feel dangerous without relying on PvP.
Well, I mean, my guess is it's going to be similar to what we did see with World Event 2. Maybe when you cross into Wildy, instead of having the caution thing, it'll be like, do you want PvP on or off?
Right.
Type of thing. You know, I know they're like, oh, it's gotta be scary, it's gotta be dangerous, and I don't know, does it really? I mean, I guess they're gonna try to do that, but I hope they don't go overboard with it, because I mean, yeah, there's a difference. It feels better to die to, an NPC or the environment rather than a person, but at the same time, if it's prohibitively difficult, then there won't be much reason to do it anyway. So
yeah, and basically what I'm seeing here, looking at some of the examples they've given, Mod Spear was showing this off, and he was at threat level 1, and he was being attacked by a volcano, and every time he would get hit by the embers from it, he'd taken 800 damage with it. So it's looking like it'll be environmental effects plus the NPCs. And I'm just waiting to the point where he increases the threat level up a little bit more. Because let's be honest, when was the last time you felt threatened by NPCs?
I still feel threatened by NPCs from time to time, especially
Like, I mean, Slayer NPCs.
right. But I mean, they can be dangerous if you get too many on you at the same time, especially if they're NPCs that do have specials and you get too many on you. Um, I know, Shane,
Oh,
you're up there in the tough PV, you know,
oh,
the PVM crowd, but I'm still down here with, you know, if you don't watch it, you can
oh!
go out.
A Ripper Demon spawned.
Huh.
Maybe that's the kind of danger we're talking about.
Could be. Yeah, that would do it.
And as he um, increases the threat level, he takes more damage from the NPCs, and different kind of NPCs also spawn with that.
Yeah, so I mean
How do you feel
it's gonna
about
be
that?
um I don't know because the thing is, say you're at a higher threat level,
Yeah, it goes up the more time you spend in. If you just leave the wilderness, it resets.
oh, is that how they're doing?
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
the more time you
Um
spend goes up, and then if you leave the wilderness, it resets to 1.
yeah, I don't know. To me it might be a little annoying because you might be out there doing a Slayer task and then once your threat level starts to get high,
Yeah,
you're gonna telly out and then go back in, run back to it,
and all
that
the
type of thing.
NPCs that appear are going to appear through multi-way combat too.
Which that is actually, you know, it depends on the NPC, but for the most part,
Ripper
I mean,
demons, multiple
great.
Ripper demons.
Well, that sucks, but I mean, at least we don't have to use our aggro potions
Yeah,
constantly. So,
yeah,
I mean, that part it's cool. But I don't know about, you know, how fun it's going to be like to have to go in, go back out, go back in, back out.
yeah. And
We'll see.
we're still a month away from that, so we'll hold our breath and wait to see how PvP works and just what the entire pool of NPCs are, because we've seen things like Rippers, we've seen things like lesser demons and such. But one other thing I want to talk about with this is that things like Warbands and the Demonic Skull will still enable PvP, but Mandrith, the Slayer Master, is actually going to be moved to the Deep Wilderness, and they are intending Slayer in the Wilderness to be the best Slayer training method.
I mean that's cool. I wonder, you know, like how does that work? Because to me, it almost seems like the higher the threat level, the better the XP should be.
Yeah.
But I don't know how you'd be, you know, I don't know how you would do that.
Yeah.
Um,
There's also
I'm
going to be
hopeful though.
a new rewards table. Reaper points will be given out. Reaper refreshes and insta-kill darts.
Hey,
That's kind of
might
what
get
I was
that
on,
defender
what I was
someday
talking
after
about with
all.
Slayer, wasn't it?
Uh-huh.
Interesting. Well, I'll hold my breath until it arrives, because as everybody knows, I'm not the biggest fan of Slayer. So
This might be more up your alley. Be more dangerous.
it would be, most definitely would be, but we'll see. We'll see how it all goes. Beyond August, they're working on the Death Cost rework. That's an active development. Also, there's going to be another quest before the end of the year. Ninja Strikes, and their goal is to start talking about content about 2 to 3 months out. They don't want to talk about it 4 months out because it can change too much, but 2 to 3 is their goal point of where they ultimately want to get to. So
Yeah, you know, I really wish we could just kind of get back to where we were, maybe a year ago. I thought they had just a really good balance with that. You kind of knew an overall thing, and then, you know, maybe a month before it, there was a little bit more detail. But even then, you didn't know every single thing. So there was still a little bit held back for the release, um, which I've really grown to kind of appreciate
Yeah,
the older I've gotten and the
yeah,
longer I've played.
yeah. I should also say graphical rework of what we saw in the preview here looks wonderful.
Yes, yes, it does.
So, um, what are you looking forward to more, the Elite Dungeon or the Wilderness rework?
I'm definitely looking more towards the Elite Dungeon. I mean, I have a lot of questions about the Wildy rework right now. Like how stuff gonna work,
Yeah,
how all these things
yeah.
are gonna
Because we'll be
work.
having a different conversation with that with the Death Cost rework and such.
Right, right. And so, if you die out there, do you just lose everything? Does it?
I sure as hell hope not.
I hope not either, but these are things that we'll just have to see. So for me right now, yeah, I'm looking more forward to the Elite Dungeon.
In any case, I promise you that we had another Behind the Crown this week. And right now we're going to go sit down with Mod Stu, who I chatted with a while back, and we had a wonderful discussion about everything game design related, how he got to Jagex, and some of his own methods that he uses when he plays RuneScape, including what his favorite quest is, which is something that might surprise all you guys. So away we go to talk to Mod Stu right now. This month we're sitting down with Mod Stu, and Mod Stu has been with Jagex for a long time. You're a senior content developer at the company. You've worked on updates like Death of Chivalry, the Ark, the Mining and Smithing rework, and of course the accidental Fletching and Firemaking update, which everybody loved from the puns and such. But today we want to get to know you a little bit better and talk about some of the areas of the game you've worked on that have improved RuneScape's quality of life. So for those who are unfamiliar with you, just give everybody a nice 20 to 30 second introduction of yourself.
So I am a senior content developer at Jagex. I've worked there for 16 years. I've been working on the RuneScape team since 2012. I am on the Law Council. I love quests. I have recently moved back over to the episodic content team, and I've really enjoyed engaging with our community. And I love my job, basically.
And that's precisely what we look for with Behind the Crown. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to sit down with us. And we're just going to start off with a bit of a quick fire round here of some questions that'll help the listener base get to know you. So what's one fact about you, Mod Stu, the person, that everybody should be aware of if they're not already aware of it?
One fact about me. So I am crushing life. I stay and play because I love my job. I work with lovely, passionate people and an equally passionate community. I enjoy the creative challenge of developing a game that's old enough to drive. I'm getting to do what I love for a living, which rocks.
And there's not too many people out there who can say that, and that's definitely a position that I want to be in one day. Not there yet, but with that, I guess the next question that we can ask with that, do you have a favorite hobby since RuneScape is so essential to your career and such? Do you have a hobby?
It's tricky to have a hobby when you work full-time in game development, and also my primary hobby is gaming. You've got to, if nothing else, research what's happening in that industry.
Right.
But I've grown up with a real love for games, and between the two, I upkeep several RuneScape accounts, so that doesn't leave much room for other hobbies. My favorite game genres are adventure and role-playing games. I make my own kefir and kombucha. I also endeavor to go outside and jog, and I keep my house plants alive with varying degrees of success.
All right. Now, a fun question I asked Maud Shrike when she was on the show. What's your favorite style of pizza?
It's been months since I had a pizza. Pineapple is my favorite fruit, but Shrike already bags eat Hawaiian in the last Behind the Crown. In an ideal world where someone else gets to wear my carbs, something meaty with a stuffed crust with extra cheese. I gotta stand love cheese.
All right, fair enough. What's your favorite book or movie currently?
That is a hard choice. A sci-fi movie that really resonates with me is Gattaca. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I have. I think that was from the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah, 1997. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
horrified to realize that's 25 years ago. This movie's older than RuneScape, but to me, it still feels like a fairly modern movie. Yeah, it's. I don't know if I necessarily need to go into all the detail about this, how it works, but basically, it's all about genetic discrimination and about this character who's pursuing his dream of going into space, and he has to sacrifice his identity and mask behind the DNA of another character to be able to pass as valid. I just find that a rather powerful and inspiring concept.
Yeah, and that's definitely from the very quick summary you've given, very heavily out of the '90s, and you could put that on a poster and it would fit right in with that. So maybe that's one I'll go to again at some point. Do you have a favorite quote you'd like to share with the listeners?
The first quote that springs to mind is from the Black Isle RPG Planescape Torment. In my opinion, Torment has some of the best writing in a video game. So one of the Nameless One's party companions is a Gutsurai warrior monk. Dakon's signature quote is, "Endure, in enduring grow strong." Because we all face hardships, but if you confront it, you persevere, you'll come out the other side with greater endurance. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger.
And you know, I think if you start peeling back the layers of the world and everything that we've all been through recently and in varying ways, applying that quote and living through that quote is definitely something we can all take from the end of the day on that. And for me, looking at quotes and quotes that people enjoy, I think it's a very revealing fact, and that's why that's always one of the questions here that we're going to be asking on Behind the Crown: what kind of quotes the JMods guide their lives with. Let's just say I realize that might sound a little bit philosophical or a little bit too deep, but that's what it is at the end of it. So with that, we're going to go into a bit of your background and dive into the game side of it. And as I mentioned at the top, you've been with Jagex for a long time. So how did you get your start at Jagex, and particularly into the games industry?
So from an early age, I've been fascinated by video games, interactive storytelling, playable narrative. I was born in England in the late 70s. Then 3 years later, my family emigrated to South Africa, hence my accent, or accent, as Galglar El Yanka would say. My father was an engineer and computing was his favorite hobby. His first computer was a 48K ZX Spectrum. He swore at it a lot. I remember being just a few years old, typing lines of basic code from a Spectrum manual to play a game on it. I think I started programming before I even learned to write. Then we got a Commodore Amiga. I was programming text parser adventure games similar to Zork and the Infocom games, Walk North, Open Mailbox, all that. It fascinated me that I could create these interactive worlds in your head using only text. Then as the industry became more mainstream and graphical fidelity improved, I grew up playing adventure games by Sierra and LucasArts, King's Quest, Space Quest, Quest for Glory, which is very similar to RuneScape, Maniac Mansion, Monkey Island, all that. I'd say point-and-click adventure games are still my favorite genre, and handily adventure game mechanics are key attributes of RuneScape's DNA. I think it's that hybrid element of adventure game in RuneScape's DNA that makes it distinctive from other MMORPGs. Anyway, in high school, my favorite subjects were English and computer science. My key interests were creative writing, programming, and gaming. When I went to university, I didn't know what to do with my life or how to reconcile those interests. In South Africa, when you do a bachelor's degree, you choose two majors. And if you do a Bachelor of Arts, you can mix and match your subjects. So I majored in English from the humanities faculty and computer science from the science faculty, and perplexed my fellow students by trekking daily between campuses. After I finished my honours degree, I moved back to England. I did some mundane commercial programming jobs for a few years, and it bored me to tears. To stay sane, relatively sane, in the evenings, I practiced game coding and contributed to Wildfire Games, an international online volunteer group developing an open source 3D engine for a real-time historical strategy game reminiscent of Age of Empires called 0 AD. I managed the programming team for Wildfire Games. I wrote a lot of design documentation, contributed voice acting. 0 AD is actually still in active development. They submitted their last free alpha build in May, and it's pretty neat to see. Yeah, it's pretty neat to see a lot of the core gameplay concepts that I designed in 2005 are still in the game. Anyway, that kind of got me through doing some commercial programming at the same time. I was miserable, sleepwalking through my work so that I could develop games in the evening. I felt like I needed to make a drastic change to improve my quality of life before I got too complacent. I was determined that I wanted to work in games. That's my passion and my joy, and I wouldn't take no for an answer. So I, somewhat foolishly, quit my day job and I relentlessly pursued roles in the games industry to force myself out of that rut. A recruitment agency forwarded a job opportunity as a junior content developer at Jagex, working on a new sci-fi MMORPG called Mixscape. Having a portfolio of playable content and screenshots from 0AD helps a lot in my job interview. I started working for Jagex in September 2006. As it turns out, my two disparate majors finally found a home as a content developer. They needed someone who could write and someone who could code, and RuneScape provides a solid platform to play around with the fun stuff of doing both.
And in terms of peeling this back, as the listeners might know, one thing that we have consistently talked about a lot here on the podcast is how the games industry is so passion-driven. We heard that with Montrike. We hear that with you as well, and that's one thing that I wasn't sure if we were going to head that direction in terms of these questions that were being laid out and what we wanted to talk about here today. But the very fact that you touched on all of that really emphasizes how much passion is shared both between the dev on a game project like RuneScape, or where you started back in the day writing code as a hobby, and then what the actual people who play the game feel. So that's one thing I truly appreciate, and I hope our listeners do as well. And with that, I guess from that, you mentioned Mexscape, and then I guess the transition from that was just to the RuneScape team. Or is there anything else that you'd like to talk about how you wound up on RuneScape?
It's quite a tricky one because I think Mixscape and Stellar Dawn still are under NDA, so I can't say too much.
Okay.
But my first 6 years at Jagex were quite eventful. So 3 years developing Mixscape until its alpha in 2009. Then a Stellar Dawn reboot in 2010 where Andrew Gower took a firmer grip on the design reins, followed by a succession of changes in Stellar Dawn's leadership and design. And we were building increasingly narrow vertical slices of Stellar Dawn from the spare parts of the previous year's iteration. Ultimately, it came to an end in 2011 when we secured the Transformers Universe IP from Hasbro. And so we restructured some of the more extraneous projects. Along with a few senior Stellar Dawn staff, I fortunately found a safe haven as a senior content developer on RuneScape, which honestly works really well because I have quite a RuneScape-y sort of sense of humor. I mean, a lot of the writing that I was doing on Mixscape actually would have fit really nicely into a RuneScape quest. So it's actually an ideal job for me. I mesh really nicely with this sort of work. So my first significant RuneScape update was a rework to Fishflingers in 2012, followed by the Brink of Extinction. Grandmaster quest. So although I joined the RuneScape team quite late in my career, I was determined to catch up. I wanted to understand and empathize with the player experience, to personally know your joys and struggles. My first goal was to play all the quests. One of my proudest moments was the first time I got my quest cape.
Yay!
Followed by Completionist cape. Yeah. Followed by a Completionist cape and Master Quest cape. Since then, I've maxed and I've quest caped on multiple accounts because I enjoy the journey to endgame and I want to understand the game as a player would.
And once again, that path to playing RuneScape and then going quest max comp, I feel like that's something that so many players do through their journeys. And one of the things that I've heard in the past through various angles of the community is that sometimes the JMods, they feel like they don't get it, and you can apply that to, of course, RuneScape, but other games as well. I think it's more pronounced in other games. You guys have a wonderful culture where you're able to be connected to the community and such, but just being able to do that connection with the community, I think, helps a lot. And the fact that you were there in effect in the trenches with the players in those early days speaks volumes to that in terms of not only your RuneScape experience, let's just say, and how that all backs up with your early typing on the keyboard experience as well, but also with how technology has changed over the years. Because you mentioned you would have started playing RS probably in the same 2011-2012 period, right? Or sooner or before that?
Well, actually, I created my first account for my interview. I hadn't actually heard of Jagex or RuneScape when I first got the interview. I think I was just slightly too old, slightly outside of the demographic. I was at university around about the time that most people were playing it in their school computer rooms.
Right.
So then basically I created an account just to get familiar with the technology, mostly just because Mixscape, same engine, it was almost like a total conversion mod of RuneScape. Same engine, different content. So I only initially needed the account essentially just to understand how the game worked. So I didn't get very far with it initially. But then since I started playing the game and working on the game in 2011, 2012, then resurrected that and I've been working on that ever since.
So if we're going to look through time here, what would you say the biggest changes that have happened over this time to how Jagex makes RuneScape are over that time, technologically, or whichever way you prefer to look at this?
Right, yeah. I mean, the infrastructure of Jagex has evolved massively in the last 20 years. The company's enjoyed tremendous growth and success. It started off as an indie project run by three brothers, then exploded in popularity, and Jagex had to grow fast to feed this massive, insatiable player base that was growing and hungry for content and updates. So RuneScape's committed to releasing weekly updates. You're on that constant treadmill of developing new content, maintaining a live service week on week. It can be tricky to get a chance to assess and optimize your processes and ensure they've scaled appropriately when you need to keep feeding the beast. But change did happen and continues to happen. From a developer perspective, I'd say the most impactful changes were migrating from our bespoke development tools to contemporary project management tools and practices like Jira, Confluence, Miro, my art pipeline. The transition from waterfall methodology to Scrum, and actually having version control.
And I'm just going to provide a bit of context for the listeners here on this. When ModStew says actually having version control, that's a big deal in computer programming, even on a smaller project. And I can only imagine what it would be like working on something as big as RS without version control with that. So
yeah, I can go into more detail about that if you like.
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
Okay.
And if it gets too technical at some point, I'll just provide a clarification for the listeners on that.
Okay, I'll try to explain it. So version control is software that manages and merges the code that developers commit to a central code base. So it allows multiple developers to work on the same project or parallel projects without conflicting or overwriting each other's code. So for most of RuneScape's life, there was no version control to manage and merge code commits. All the RuneScape developers worked in one work-in-progress environment, and then releases got picked out of WIP through file lists and line copies by the upload manager. So there was no way to merge different versions of files if two people made changes to it, other than comparing them line by line. We had to just set a file to read-only, and then if you needed to minimize how long you locked them for, because someone else may also need to make changes to that file. So that's I think partly why developers tended to work in their own little corners of the world, like have their own personal quest series, or like one developer was developing one area of the map, because it helped us to separate out who was working on which files at a time.
Like that would also maybe be why you guys back in the day had curators for certain skills and such.
Yeah, exactly. So there was no way to test your changes locally before you committed them. You had to be really careful about compiling your code to ensure it'll pack clean. If you added code to the game and someone else packed in a syntax error, it'd affect all the developers. Nobody would be able to load up a client and work things. On Mixscape, we had one WIP environment in the same sort of way initially as RuneScape. And we had this trophy that we'd pass around the development team, a statue of a pig called the login pig. It was passed around like a badge of shame to the last person who broke the login script. And so, because if someone broke login, nobody could load up a client and test their stuff. And sometimes someone might break login and then also forget to uncheck that file and then go off to lunch, and then everything grinds to a standstill.
Oh wow! And when And when you start peeling all that back, you can see how that's definitely one of the bigger changes that would have happened in history there.
Yeah, and it wasn't like a big deal initially because it was a very small team. But as we scaled up, as we need to be producing more and more content, we needed a better infrastructure for allowing lots of people to work on the same thing simultaneously. So we established certain industry practices. Actually, on Stellar Dawn, most of these practices were established there, and then they migrated to the RuneScape team later on. Yeah, so because we had a smaller content footprint, we didn't have this commitment of needing to produce releases on a weekly basis. We were able to install some new processes, so more contemporary processes like using version control software, more industry standard ticketing systems, and also we moved over from waterfall methodology to agile Scrum methodology. And basically, a lot of those things, when the Stellar Dawn team shut down, the managers that were working on there found new homes over in RuneScape, particularly Mod Connor, our QA lead. He has a presentation he has a presentation on GDC Vault actually that kind of goes into this transition and all the different technology that we previously used and how it's migrated over. I can send you a link if you like.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. And with that, I think it would be really interesting to see what the rest of the games industry has to say on that when he presents on that. That's actually a fun little fact there. And one final thing on this before we move on, just a final clarification. Can you explain for the listeners what the difference between waterfall and agile Scrum is?
Oh, sure. So basic principle of waterfall is you design everything in detail up front, and then you implement it, and then you test it. So it's a pretty standard linear approach, the same sort of thing that you might do in, say, building a movie or various other fairly expensive development practices where if you don't make good decisions early on, then it can wind up having to redo things and wind up working on something for a longer period of time.
Like when you build a house.
Yeah, exactly. So you need a really good blueprint to begin with in order to have a nice, clean construction. So that's how we used to work in Waterfall, and it worked pretty well, particularly when it was like one developer working on one thing. As you mentioned earlier, there'd be curators of certain skills, or one person working on a particular quest line. That kind of isolation meant that people could focus on that one thing. They had everything in their own head about how it worked. So the isolation worked okay. But also that has kind of risks to it. If that particular developer leaves, you don't know where they were going with that quest line. There's a lot of kind of loss of knowledge, a lot of specialization. So agile methodology, Scrum, is a approach that's more based more around agility. That you are committing to a 2-week sprint, so to 2 weeks of work on something. You decide ahead of time, just for that 2 weeks, how much work you're going to do. You plan out in that small segment, and then you do a series of these in an iterative process, and you review what you did in that 2-week period in between in the sprint reviews. There are various ceremonies. You're reviewing your backlogs, and there's burn down charts and all sorts of weird terminology. But It basically amounts to you're supposed to be doing things in smaller chunks that are less specific in their time frame, so that if you need to pivot, if it turns out that you need to descope a particular project a little bit, or more people are needed on a different one, or you need to move some more people in, it allows for a lot more agility because you're taking your work on those projects in smaller bites, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and with that, I have a feeling that's in general where the industry has gone in a lot of directions on that, and it's nice to see that Jagex has pivoted in that direction as well in the recent years. But I want to get back to some content, specifically just talk a little bit about the accidental skilling content, the accidental fletching and fire making update that you were part of recently with Mod Abe, and it was something that our community found it very refreshing in terms of what a skilling update is and how it can be an example of how a standalone skilling update should feel going into the future. And one of the things that we saw with that is that this update feels as though it was designed quite well. It was able to teach you how to play it from the outset of that. Has that always been part of the process in designing an update, to make it so that it adds some sort of tutorial for it to onboard the players? Or is that a relatively new thing?
Well, so first of all, credits to Mod Abe, my co-developer on that project, because the design of the 3 activities and their tutorial are mostly his work. So I really can't take the credit for this one. But when it comes to tutorials, it depends on the aims of the project and how accessible it needs to be. So a particular project might require a tutorial as like a must-have feature. It's in its aims for that project. Something like, say, invention or archaeology being a new skill, it was needing to introduce this new core loop. It was a requirement of that project that it have a tutorial. Something like Davendale is entirely a tutorial, so that's obviously not something you can cut. Beyond that, it's really one of those things where we have to prioritize. When we are doing the pre-production for a project, we start with when it needs to release and what the aims are to what we're trying to achieve, and then from that you identify what are the must-have features that are necessary to ship, what's the minimum viable product, and then other things you'd like to do, but ultimately they're stretch goals. If you could cut it and the project would still achieve its aims. So long story short, the tutorials, like many other things that are they may be stretch goals, they may be must-to-haves depending on the project. And it varies. It's not a particularly interesting answer, I'm afraid, but that's basically it.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. You also answered where I was going to go next with that. So thank you for that. So with that, I'll just ask you, what was your favorite part of working on this update? Because a lot of people who are looking at this would see it was the puns that the both of you put together. But if you have a different favorite part, please do let us know.
I had an incredible amount of fun working on this update. It was the first episodic content update for both Mod Abe and myself. He'd previously been on Ninja. I'd been on Core Experience for a few years. So we hadn't done anything creative for quite a while. The last creative thing he'd worked on was his Total Combat quest on Ninja. So yeah, definitely really enjoyed writing the dialogue, writing all the puns, all the silliness. From like a tonal perspective, it was like really refreshing. We got to do a light-hearted update near the Anachronia dinosaur farm and feed off that energy from the Potterington Empire and use some. Yeah, and you've got these adorable ancient Zygomites that are very underused at Anachronia, and these adorable baby dinosaurs.
They just fit so well when they get their hair cut, don't they?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, and a lot of this was actually just transplanting a previous design to a new environment. So, an earlier version of this, we were going to place this update in Centiston. It was going to be an immediate follow-up to the Extinction Quest. That's why it was, required extinction. So, tonally, it would have been played a lot more straight and sober. It's come after Aya being destroyed. Spoilers. So, in the end. We couldn't quite make that fit with how we were planning to use the environments. So we're allowed to do this as something geographically disconnected. And then we had to find somewhere to put it. So Anachronia has a lot of space and all these assets that we can reuse. So that it instead provided this palette cleanser between Extinction and Twilight of the Gods, where we could just have fun, write some silly dialogue and loads of examines.
Yeah, and I know one thing as a player that I've heard and the community has said with this is that this update felt like a very traditional RS update in the sense that it's something you could go back to those early years and open the game up on a Monday or Tuesday and expect to have, and I think a lot of people appreciated for that, and with that, I think that's kind of what you're getting to with Palette Cleanser, in that it was just so much more lighthearted from where we'd been previously with the Elder God Wars fronts and world-ending quests, so to speak, on that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is really hard to find a favorite thing about this update, honestly, because in my view, it went so well. There were a lot of things that were stretch goals that we still managed to get in there. I'm really pleased about. I'm really glad we managed to include the tutorial that we're able to do all the achievements that we wanted. And there was a lot of a collaborative process going on here. Like Mod Blackwitch was our environment artist, and she was really inspirational in coming up with environmental storytelling when she was decorating the scene.
I think I saw her post somewhere about one of the signs she painted for that, I think.
Yeah, exactly. That's that sort of thing. It's like she didn't get all that much concept art for the environment itself, so she was kind of winging it to a large extent, and she got a good understanding of what we were trying to do narratively, and put items in the set dressing that helped to portray that as well. And we kind of had this bit of one-upmanship where she'd add some new bit of scenery to the scene, even if it's just like an innocuous rock. And I was like, I'm going to put an examine on this. So I was putting silly descriptions on the most inane of items.
And that's exactly it. That's that traditional RS feeling that makes it feel so full. The examine infos, the achievements with it, and the little tutorial to get everything onboarded with that. And for me personally, it was the achievements combined with that examine info that just really pushed it over the edge and added the cherry on top with it. So.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I even managed to squeeze in this little micro quest, and that was another one that just came out quite by accident. So Bill and Ben, these Zygomites, they were added with the 120 farming update. They were pre-existing characters that basically just existed to tell you about this mystical tree to teleport between. And Bill's examine was his favorite item is his magic pot, which is probably a thinly veiled drug reference by Anachronia's developers, but whatever. So when Blackwitch was designing the barbershop, she happened to map down an empty cooking pot next to Ben from our set dressing library. And it got me thinking, why does Ben have Bill's magic pot? So I stayed up one night and I wrote a quick, tiny micro quest just to close that narrative loop. And then also make some more references to Bill and Ben, the flower pot men that they're based on, and also add a Master Quest Cape achievement. So that's like the sort of we riffed off each other with new ideas as where all the awful names for the achievements came from. And yeah, I love it. I hope I get to do updates with this amount of hidden stuff in the future. I mean, I really have fun.
If all the non-quest and non-PVM updates could be in the same template as this, I would be absolutely over the moon with that, and I'm sure many players would as well. So, big thank you on that, and that's why I wanted to talk to you a little bit on that. But you mentioned MicroQuest, and we need to talk about Quest, obviously, because you mentioned you're a huge quester.
Yes.
And RuneScape is incredibly unique in its quest system. I've played other MMOs, and I know how their fetch quests go and what a quest is talked about there, and that's why RS is so unique. And quests are our story vehicle, and they begin, of course, back in 2001 with the famous Cook's Assistant, and we're seeing it all through this summer with Extinction, and then most recently Twilight of the Gods. So you mentioned that you worked on reworking some quests, and if you were to pick an example of a rework quest, which one do you feel would be most stark in terms of its before and after presentation that you worked on?
Oh, you keep asking me to choose one thing. It's really hard. That's a really difficult question because, I mean, all the reworks were intended to be transformative. I'd say, not surprisingly, the ones with the largest time and resource budget made the biggest difference. Like the Ariane and Ozan double bills, they were not only sizable modern quests in their own right, were fully voiced. They included removing the old quest and addressing all the dependencies that had been built on top of that quest ever since. They also included a significant area rework. So like the whole new reworked Wizard's Tower, all of Al-Kharid being reworked, the Black Knight's Fortress with Death of Chivalry. So it's difficult to compare them because some of them had a lot more time than others, but all of them I think made some kind of healthy difference to the game.
All right, fair enough. And as a community, you see that you love quests both from your work that you do at Jagex and what we've already talked about here in Behind the Crown, and everything that we have in the modern quest list is something that you've worked on in some way or another. And I'm going to ask you what draws you to quests. I think I probably know the answer from our opening discussion, but if there's anything you'd like to expand on what draws you to quests in RS as a player or as a dev, feel free to expand on that.
Yeah, it's predominantly what I mentioned earlier, that love of interactive storytelling and narrative-driven gameplay, and also that is this notion of point-and-click adventure game puzzles and interactions in a story developing in a similar sort of way to an adventure game. Not just the quests though, but also like quest systems are something that really fascinates me. Because I was really frustrated when I was working on my first quests, The Break of Extinction and Death of Chivalry, with our quest systems. They have so we've had various quest guidance systems that have been added over the years, like overview screens and blue box highlighting and quest complete screens, quest tooltips in the world map. All these things kind of help you find the quests, find your way through them. They're all very healthy features. They were added in isolation, and their feature set gradually grew. And because we're on this treadmill of needing to always add new content, it can be tricky to find the space to go back and rework all the content to be more consistent, particularly if it's something that's not particularly player-facing. So like a lot of our older quests, the ones that were added before the overview screens were implemented, didn't have that feature. And a lot of these guidance systems that we added, they didn't share data. There was a lot of redundant duplication. So something that I got really excited about doing in TAP was reworking that to consolidate a lot of that information so that we could write quests more efficiently. There was even this... sorry, I'm probably getting a bit technical.
No, that's fine. I was just going to ask, so with that then, it's more of a system about writing and integrating the quests into games, so to speak, that wasn't there before, that has paved the way for some of the things that we're seeing today, I guess would be the clarification on that then.
Yeah, exactly. So, like for example, it's working with the opportunities that had been created thus far and kind of going back and maximizing them. Like a new data structure had been created for quests a while back. It was actually the same sort of infrastructure that was used for engine cached achievements later on.
Okay.
And that was originally only used by the website's adventurers log. So having to maintain that database, and then also the quest data structure database with all of the like required items and so forth listed on them. And so there's a lot of information was duplicated between the two, and efficiency and redundancy kind of bothers me. I want to be productive and minimize risks, so I took it upon myself to kind of consolidate all those things and make it a lot cleaner.
So with that then, was your work that you did on the specifically the quest list in terms of modernizing that and bringing that forward, was that easier to do then, would you say, after all the technical plumbing was done behind the scenes for the quest system?
Yeah, it was. That's where it gets tricky, because making changes on the back end that only really benefit developers is nice, but it's also kind of harder to sell as an update. You kind of have to justify the cost for that. You're spending X amount of hours with this. It's going to cost us this. The players aren't going to see it. Is it worth doing, kind of thing. I can totally see that. Yeah, so basically the player-facing improvements that came in there, like adding new types of quest list sorts and showing the quest lengths and all these essentially features that I added as well. Those were things that they were really quick wins. Primarily were there to justify being able to ship the update, so the players got something out of it.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. And we'll come back to that on achievements. And I always think it's so interesting when we talk to content developers who are, of course, also questers in this, because with that, there's that vested interest. And one other thing with this is that I think you share with a number of the players is that there's so many different ways to play RS. And as an example of this, we have your questers, we have your PVM types, but we also have the peers. And last November, I rolled the skill peer for specific reasons. And one thing that I was pleased to see when I started going through that is that a lot of the XP rewards for quests are now in the form of lamps. And this is how this ties into the quests, the quest systems that we were talking about. How important is it to you that these alternate playstyles are accommodated in RuneScape?
From a personal perspective, very important.
Okay.
So. I mean, these changes that I was making, it was essentially because individual players asked for certain quests to give their rewards in the form of discardable lamps rather than direct XP, so that it wouldn't ruin their pure accounts. And like I can empathize with that. It's a playstyle you've chosen to adopt, but also here's a roadblock. Here's something that we can do differently. The drawback, unfortunately, is that the way that it takes longer to build a quest reward that way in the form of a lamp. The trouble with quests is pretty much everything is bespoke. Partly due to like different developers working on things in isolation. Like I said, all things are kind of implemented in slightly different ways. So where it comes to like converting quest XP from direct to lamps, it's like we got to create a unique lamp for that particular XP in that particular quest that gives a particular value.
Interesting. So it's not just a case of give out XP lamp in fishing worth this amount of XP. Then it's a unique quest item for that.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. So that basically meant that it was something that I could only really do on like a case by case basis. So I was chipping away at that at the time, and I got quite a lot of the ones that the people asked for done. But yeah, again, the inconsistency bothers me. I'd like it to be all the same across the board. But anyway, getting back to your question. You have to weigh the benefit versus cost of everything we do, essentially. RuneScape is so vast that any time we spend on something is time not spent on a whole host of other things. Do I fix a bug that regularly impacts the majority of players, or do I make accommodations for a tiny community that chooses to limit themselves? Those are really difficult questions that our producers require us to make. So as much as I have a personal affinity for skill pures, we have to consider the return on investment.
We're a small
community thing to say, but
we're a small community. Yeah.
It's a community I really care about, and those people are really passionate about doing it. But it's a hard one to reconcile because of the return on investment.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. And with that, I think everybody plays their own way for achievements, and that's something that once someone is a RuneScape player, they become very quickly accustomed to, is that the game's core loop is effectively setting a goal and then finding a bunch of other little goals along the way, and then repeating that process all the way from level 3, and sometimes staying level 3, working on skills, or sometimes even going all the way to comp or trim with that. And it's all part of what I see as the achievement, either something that the game gives out to you or something that the player sets for themselves. And with this, we can go back to 2017, specifically the achievement system that came out, and it's finally reached a place where part of the core experience of the game and the new content is regularly released with achievements. And this kind of goes towards either your game developer perspective or a RuneScape player or somebody who just plays games in general. But how important do you feel achievements are for RuneScape?
So we're talking earlier about like return on investment. I would say that achievements are incredibly important from that perspective. So like if you ever heard of the bottle test, basically there was a classification of players into 4 key groups: explorers, killers, socializers, and achievers. So as far as a bottle is concerned, a quarter of your player base are achievers. That makes them really important and significant. Particularly when you've completed all the quests, you maxed all the skills, I feel like the main draw in the in-game are the repeatable content like bossing and the achievements.
And I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot with this, but which category would you put yourself in personally for that, of the 4 that you listed?
Me personally, definitely achiever all the way. I would say explorer secondarily. Socializer, I'd probably say is the lowest. I'm actually fairly asocial. I kind of am very focused on my own personal goals. And I don't particularly like killing things. I kind of prefer a non-aggressive approach. So yeah, I'm different. So again, there's a bias there. I love going after tangible goals and achieving them and getting things getting ticked off. It makes my chemical brain very happy.
All right, fair enough. And With that, you mentioned that you have taken a RuneScape account to comp before, or was it Trim? I'm sorry, I'm not remembering presently.
I'm
right now.
I'm a few achievements away from Trim,
Okay.
but yeah, a comp and Master Questscape on my main.
All right, and this is going to be a really interesting question to ask. Do you see one of RuneScape's end games for the high level players as one where they hunt a series of achievements that then leads to max, comp, trim, or master quest? Or do you see endgame as something different? And this is, I feel, going to be a very interesting question based on your experience both as a dev and a player.
Certainly the way that I see it is that, so first of all, what do you define as endgame? So are we saying that endgame is when you've maxed all your skills? Is that like when the game really opens up?
And that's a question that we always struggle with too here on the podcast. Is endgame when you hit 99? Is it when you decide to go for all 120s, including the virtual ones? Is it when you comp? Is it when you do trim? And this is something that I feel like there's a bit of a murky question about with RS. And personally, for me, I'd say it's when you're maxed. That would be my personal answer to this.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think that's the joy of RuneScape is that you have those different progression paths. There isn't just one path to go towards. Like when I started playing my account, my first priority was to get the quest cape. It wasn't necessarily to max all the skills.
And that could be end game for you as well, right? Getting your quest
cape. Yeah, exactly. But my end game was get through the story mode essentially first.
Right.
Do the minimum amount of skilling to do that. And then I skilled afterwards to fill in the gaps with all of the content I unlocked. Some players don't care about the story at all. They just want to kill things, and they just want to accelerate to the end game bossing as quickly as they possibly can, and be really efficient about focusing on the combat skills. And then you've got, as I mentioned, the people who are achievers. They're completionists that want to complete every achievement in the game, grind away at things that are really obscure, complete collections. The different types of players want very different things. I think achievements help to foreground those goals, because all the things I've mentioned have achievements attached to them. It helps you be able to identify in the system, this is something that you've done or you haven't done, or here's your progress to doing this thing. I think that's where achievements are really important.
Yeah, and it's something that we didn't have for so long, and I feel having a system in place for the game allows the players to play that way if they want to, which is something that is needed in a way to guide people towards that entire progression of max, comp, trim, master, quest, or maybe even just quest, as I know plenty of people who set that as their primary goal. And one of the reasons that this was in the front of the discussion here on this episode is that we actually just finished a good discussion here on the podcast about the achievement system, and before that the CompCape rework as well.
Yeah, I've listened to both.
So with that, I guess one thing to just ask from this is, as a player, what drove you to comp? Because I feel like everybody's comp story is different. Then we'll kind of pivot to RuneScape after that.
I guess it's kind of tied around the question that you asked, in that I'd done Questscape, and then I'd maxed all the skills, and then I'm looking for, well, where do I go from here? At the time, there wasn't a Master Questscape, so I did CompCape first, because I needed to tick off all these things. I need to participate in everything. Then I started doing most of Master Questscape because there were all sorts of things that were unlocks. The things that I had unlocked for the quests, and I'd often forgotten that I'd even accessed this thing, but there's an achievement to it that covers going back and doing it. And then I filled in the remaining blanks in Master Questscape and the things that were a little bit more combat oriented, rare drops from the King Black Dragon and so forth. Lost Riders took forever.
Right?
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of people talk about that one.
Yeah, but this is where achievements are great, though, because like me as a player who doesn't particularly like combat, it was encouraging me to move outside of my comfort zone and try something new after I'd exhausted the things that I really wanted to do.
Okay. Yeah, and in some ways, that's a good progression to have, because you can also see parts of, I feel, the Elder God Wars saga that we just wrapped up. We're kind of pushing players in that direction, in that you'd get a bit of a, I think it was an Extinction, you got a bit of a brief taster of each of the fronts, and then if you wanted to learn more about that and do the full boss of, say, the Croesus front or something, you could go and do that after the quest if the story was your first example of that. And it'd be interesting in a focus group or something to see how many people move into different aspects of the game based on that. So, with that, we're just going to pivot to some quick RS questions that guide yourself as an RS player. What's your favorite skill?
I'm trying not to be predictable, because my first instinct is to say archaeology, like everybody else. It's just really such a well-designed skill.
It really is.
Yeah, I generally enjoy gathering skills. I like the simple gratification loop of do thing, get stuff. RuneScape, rune crafting was my first 99, but that's because RuneScan had just come out when I started working on RuneScape, so that's kind of cheating. Personally, I enjoyed the core of divination on release. I've done Jagex caches, I think, once, maybe for an achievement.
Okay.
I didn't do warbands either. I feel like that's cheating.
Yeah. You're going to get 100% agreement from me on that.
Yeah, but I mean, divination, it's also accumulated a really nice assortment of content to break up the grind. There's Mazrat Memories and Memorial to Jagex, Elder Divination, Hall of Memories, a lot of more story-driven elements to divination. I'm going to also pivot again and say I'm going to go with fishing.
Okay.
Fishing is, it's one of the first ones that I 99'd. It's a skill that's lovely and laid back and relaxed. It's something low intensity to do on a second screen. And when I maxed fishing, I was like, I can't fish anymore.
Right.
There's no more numbers.
Yeah. I 100% get that feeling myself. So, gotcha on that. Now, this is something we could probably talk about for hours. Favorite quest?
Okay, I've got a really long answer to this one prepared for you, but I think it's going to be worth it. So
okay.
Bear with me.
Strap in, folks.
Yep. I'm going to resist giving the likeliest answer, like One Pissing Notes or Chosen Commander or The World Wakes or Fate of the Gods. Those are some of the best storytelling in RuneScape, and if you haven't played them, definitely play them. But I'm going to be controversial and say Salt in the Wound. Because despite all the controversy about pillars and the like, Salt in the Wound was the first quest that profoundly affected me on an emotional level. Okay. And honestly, Salt in the Wound was the first quest Mod Osborne design reviewed, so that probably had something to do with it. So after defeating Mother Malum, you can talk to Lucy, this old woman with incredibly long hair that the Slug Queen used as her host. And this old withered woman croaks, "Is that you, mummy? I can't see you. My eyes are still sleepy." So she's gone blind. Lucy's been possessed by the Slug Queen since she was a little girl. She lived and lost her life as a captive host to this monster. She's woken from what she thinks was a scary dream, and now she's an old, blind woman. Lucy never got to grow up to have a childhood. She's about to die of old age, and she doesn't know it yet. And during this conversation, the music is this mournful melody. It sounds like it's played on a child's xylophone or a music box, which makes the scene so much more haunting and sorrowful. And then you have a choice, 2 dialogue options. You can lie to Lucy. You can tell her it was just a dream, to rest her eyes, promise she won't have another nightmare. You can keep her ignorant of her tragic life, and she dies peacefully. Or you can tell her the truth, that you defeated the Slug Queen, and now she's free. The monsters from her nightmare are real. She reaches out to her parents for comfort, but they died a lifetime ago. And then Lucy dies from old age, having never got to grow up. Now, someone cared so much, took the ramifications of the story seriously, and masterfully expressed the true relatable horror of mortality. They cared enough about the details to make me mourn a character in her first and only conversation. Now that is why I love RuneScape quests.
You've just hit the key point that I have heard so many times in the discussion of Clan Quest about any random quest in game that can do something like that. And you're entirely right. Salt in the Wound is not a quest that people will come back to. It's probably a quest that a good portion of the people don't actually remember. But this quest in itself shows the breadth of what we have in RS, from this very deeply emotional connection with this character to the very absurd humor that we saw in things like the Bacon Quest and such, just to pick a humor-based quest. So thank you for that. That's a really wholesome answer.
Thank you.
And with that, I want to just move on and talk about what are your current goals in RS? What are you working on as a player?
Well, first of all, get my Master Quest plate back. I'm one drop away from completing the Dream of Ire stories. I'm about halfway through the Yak track, so my other goal right now is to finish that. I don't know about you, but I don't even pay attention to the rewards I unlock. I just need to complete it before it goes away.
Yeah, and that's something. When we got the first Yak tracks, myself and so many of the other people in our podcast community were very taken up with the Yak track, just because it gave us this path of something to do, when in reality we might have just been, like you said, just sitting there instead cutting trees. It really diversified the experience that we were feeling with that. So yeah. I can 100% empathize with you on both of those. Are there any longer term goals, anything beyond the vision of Master Quest after that you want to share with the listeners?
Well, I do want to get trimmed comp eventually. Most of what I have left is group bossing, and as I mentioned, killing, socializer. Neither of those things are really things that I particularly enjoy. So it'll probably be a while before I get around to doing those. So in the meantime, I'm focusing on just completing all the achievements other than the ones in the combat category. So I've completed the lore, area tasks, and exploration categories, and I'm currently working on the skills and activities. So essentially trying to complete RuneScape other than the combat aspects.
All right. Sounds good. And to wrap this all up, what's your favorite thing about RuneScape? It can be about the game, it can be about the community, it can be about working there. This one's entirely open to you.
Okay. Mostly it's the agency and the freedom to choose your own adventure. You have all these skills that level up as you use them. So no matter what you do, you're making progress. There's experience, tangible, measurable benefit that expresses the time you spent on a wide variety of activities. It's a place with measurable goals and clear outcomes. If you put in the work, you reap the rewards. There's something soothing about the certainty and delayed gratification of that. RuneScape's a massively multiplayer game. There's a community there for those that want it. But something I really appreciate is that most of the content can be soloed. It's your journey, your choice. You have 20 years of content to explore. It's a living game that grows every week, and you get to decide what you want to do today. RuneScape is your greatest adventure. And,
as a player, I completely agree with that. I think many people in the audience are going to agree with that as well, because as I said, I have been around since 2004 on that same angle that you just mentioned, and you think at some point you're going to get bored of it and need to move on, but you're always going to be able to find something around that next corner with that. And I think going through all of these questions, not only about RuneScape, but how you got there, really I think paints a picture of who you are and what's been happening over the last 20 years. So, Stu, I sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your day to sit down with us here and do this. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap this up?
It's very much my pleasure to be involved. Thank you for inviting me. I'm a fan of the podcast myself, so it's really quite an honor to be here. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Mod Stu. Hopefully everybody enjoyed that. I know I'm definitely enjoying these Behind the Crown episodes. So huge thank you to Mod Stu for sitting down. And one thing that has just been completely amazing in the two that we've done so far is that there's just such passion from everybody who works at Jagex in the development team to build RuneScape, and you can definitely see why they're so successful at that when they do that. And passion, as we talked about so many times before, is just so key to the game design field, and it's so wonderful to be able to sit down and experience that firsthand. And that's been my number one takeaway from doing the two Behind the Crowns that we've done. So hopefully we've been able to convey that to you, the listeners. And if you guys have any ideas about who you'd like to see for other Behind the Crowns, just pop us a note in the RSBANDB Discord, tag me at Shane, and we'll see what we can do about getting those people on. But thanks again for that, Mod Stu. All right, so we're gonna go to pick of the week right now, and this is a pick of the week that I've been thinking of doing for a while, and this one came up in pre-show that it might be worth doing, because this past weekend we did our roundtable, where Patreon supporters can come in and we just have a nice general chat about everything RuneScape related. And sometimes we do it differently. Every 6 months we do it with Microsoft Flight Simulator. And this time we were flying from the Eastern Cascades into Seattle. And we got to do that this past weekend, and we did it in a small General Aviation Cessna 172. But we have done other roundtables in the past with an Airbus A320, amongst other things, and that's one of the free planes that's given for Microsoft Flight Simulator. And I've done, as pick of the week before, the open source A32NX as one of the planes, in that if you're going to be flying the Airbus in Flight Simulator and you don't want to pay for a paid add-on, you really should get the A32NX. But that's not the pick of the week. That's been done as pick of the week before. This pick of the week is a YouTube channel with playlist going through a tutorial, including full setup through takeoff, climbing, cruise, descent, and landing of the Airbus A320 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's for the paid version, the Phoenix A320 paid add-on, but everything you see here will be applicable to the A32NX, and parts of it will also be applicable to the base Airbus A320 that exists in Microsoft Flight Simulator. But this is the kind of thing that anybody who is new to Flight Simulator or new to the Airbus should definitely pick up, because Tanis and I were talking in pre-show about just how complex the Airbus can seem if you're not familiar with it. And the whole idea behind these collection of videos, specifically the tutorial ones, is that it's designed to make it so that anybody who has just got into Microsoft Flight Simulator will be able to sit down and learn the aircraft. And that's something that is going to influence how much fun you have with Flight Simulator, because if you're not able to get the aircraft up and you're not able to command it effectively, you're gonna wind up not enjoying yourself. And the videos here as tutorials are definitely gonna help you do that. So that's why that's the pick of the week. You're definitely gonna want to sit down and get comfy for some of these, because some of them are quite long, upwards of the first one is an hour long, the full setup for it. The climb and cruise ones are a bit shorter. Landing is another long one, but they're very in-depth and they're very interesting, and they're done by somebody who's actually a real-world Airbus pilot. So that's the pick of the week. It'll be linked in the full show notes at update.show.
That's a great pick, Shane. I'm looking really forward to checking that out, because it's definitely one of the planes that I've struggled with when I am playing, straight like you and Theron do. I get very lost with that plane, and it's just very complicated. So I'm looking forward to checking this out. Yeah,
and I'd recommend anybody who wants to get into it, just skip the vanilla version that's in Flight Simulator. Get the A32NX. If you Google A32NX, you'll be taken to the Fly-by-Wire website, the company that makes it. It's an open source mod for it. You just download it, and it downloads, or you download the installer, and it installs it right into Flight Simulator, and you just choose the plane from within Flight Simulator and go. They've actually made it really simple for that, and their website has documentations, tutorials as well if you prefer reading rather than watching. But this is definitely my go-to plane of choice, the A32NX, and the channel is a good resource for anything Airbus related as well. So that's the pick of the week. So enjoy.
Very cool.
We also have our weekly PC gaming events that happen on Tuesday. This past week, we spent about an hour and a half or so playing golf with your friends, of all things. We brought 9...
That's a fun game.
We brought 9 people into it. The limit is 12. We were wondering if we were going to hit the limit. And, it's just utter chaos when it comes to it. Because if you turn collisions on, of course, and you... put your ball in the wrong spot. You have an annoying person on your team who will decide that it's time to hit your ball and send you off into who knows where. So that's the kind of shenanigans that happen at PC Gaming Night each and every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern in the RSBANDB Discord, rsbnb.com/Discord. Just join that. Games that are usually on offer include things like the source-based games like Half-Life 2 Deathmatch, TF2, Counter-Strike, Trouble in Terrorist Town. We have other options on there as well, like Jackbox, Golf with Your Friends, Among Us, and so on and so forth. So if you're interested in that, just pop by the Discord on Tuesdays or subscribe in the new React Roles channel to the PC Gaming Night role, and we'll tag whenever there's a new poll, whenever there's a new game that's happening that evening, and we look forward to seeing you. And initially we used to just do the source-based games, but there's so many free games nowadays that we can actually expand the field out a lot to things like Golf with Your Friends and whatnot. So it'd be interesting to see where we go with this, but we've been doing this for a few weeks now, so rsbnb.com/Discord. And with that, we can move on to our achievements of the week. Starting off, Azadia got 99 farming on June 28th. Miss Alaska got 200 million agility XP on the 28th. Jakir got 120 prayer. Meriwether got 120 construction. And Sparty Pants got 120 fletching on the 27th.
Nice. Well, then moving on to the 26th, we have Battle/X with 99 farming, River Design with 99 summoning on the 25th, and Dat Engineer with 120 construction on the 23rd, and Xenon Ray with 120 summoning on the 23rd. Nice job, everyone.
Nice. What have you been up to? You still smithing? Or are you doing beach?
A little smithing, a little beach, but this was I had a big week in going to buy my my Crypt Bloom. I am one piece short, so I went right back to my smithery. Because we gotta print off enough money to buy my very last piece. But yeah, and it was crazy to go from like the most money I've ever had in this game to
a
like
few K?
looking down and doing a few K.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh,
that's
wow.
how it goes. That's how it goes.
Yeah. But that's been about it. Just enjoying the beach. Like I said, I've seen some people I haven't seen for a long time, so that was nice.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
I am right on the tip of finishing off my second 25,000 dineros.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And what's going to be interesting is to see where the price of these land come Monday, and with that, which variant of the charged version is going to be the most expensive. Is it going to be the Jazz one because of the Elite Dungeon, or is it going to be something more conventional like Wen or Full, or is it going to be the odd one, Bic? Which I think people are still trying to figure out what the use case is. We kind of laid out about where you'd use them theoretically, but as with all things, these meta changes happen relatively slowly over time with that. So I'm personally betting it'll be the Jazz arrows based on the Elite Dungeon that we're seeing. That's my guess. And after the Dine arrows are done, I think I will be spending some time at Carapac this weekend, getting the anima for that.
There you go.
So, And, with that, the unfortunate thing is that I'm only on task 26 of Yak Track.
I'm not sure where I'm at. I'm in mid 20s too, so
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're about half done, and then I imagine there's going to be some that'll just complete relatively quickly after that, so it's not going to be the end of the world, so to speak, with that. So, but I don't think we have anything else for this episode, so once again, thank you to Mod Stu for taking the time to sit down with us and do an episode of Behind the Crown. We'll be back next week with all the information on the new Elite Dungeon and Zamorak's boss and all the drops and the meta theory crafting behind that. But if you want to subscribe to us so you don't make sure you don't miss the podcast when it arrives, just visit update.show/subscribe. You'll be taken to our subscribe page. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon, Pocket Casts, YouTube, and Stitcher, amongst other things. And if you want to subscribe on YouTube, do leave us a like and subscribe there, because that helps the channel out and helps us out in terms of discoverability and all of the nibbles and extra content that gets produced there. youtube.com/RSBANDB. But with that being said, we'll see you guys next week for another episode of RSBANDB Update. And, of course, for the Legacy of Zamorak. It should be an interesting week. See you next week, everyone. Take care.
See ya.